From a diplomat to one of the biggest pop stars in Kenya, Gilad is well known for his hit song with Wendy, Unajua.
So my name is Gilad Milo. My artist name is Gilad. A lot of people get my name wrong. So they'll say Gilad, or Girad, or Gerald, or Gitao, or yeah, but my name is Gilad.
He was born in 1971 in Jerusalem, Israel, in a family of 4 boys and is the former deputy head of mission at the Israeli embassy in Kenya.
I'm born in Israel, raised in Jerusalem, and then in different countries around the world. My dad was an ambassador, diplomat for Israel. So we grew up living in different countries in Europe, in Germany, in London, in England, in New York, in Turkey, and of course always coming back to Israel. I came to Kenya in later years, now backpacking in the late 90s, and I came back again to be here as a diplomat in early 2000. We grew up like brothers, traveling around with family because of my dad's work. Yeah, my dad represented Israel as a diplomat, so Germany, England, always in schools which were Jewish schools, so always Jewish schools, but also to maintain the Hebrew, the language, so that we didn't lose our Hebrew language, our connection to Israel when we went back. So we'd study in English schools and get English like Americans, like Brits, wherever we were. But always they had like half-day Hebrew studies, so you'd also maintain your language in Hebrew. But then you'd hear the language of the country where we're living. So like when I grew up in Turkey, I was then 15, 16, 17, growing up high school years, and I was hearing Turkish and loved the music of the language. So I picked up words. I didn't formally learn proper. But even today, you know, if you're like flying Turkish Airlines, or if we pass through Istanbul on the way to Israel when we go home, then I love to hear, you know, hear the Turkish. Swahili in Kenya only came much later. That came later.
Gilad is also a father. He has a 20-year-old son who is a very talented musician, and he plays guitar and saxophone and has a great feel for the energy of the music. His 16-year-old daughter is no less talented and has a sweet singing voice, and one of his brothers is also a musician.
We have four boys. I'm second. Firstborn is my older brother, Guy. All live in Israel. And then 2 younger brothers. Yeah, I mean, I could do a whole TV program on each of them. Really amazing people, and you know, we're a very strong, bonded family. Yeah, I mean, you know, 4 brothers, what can you expect? Everything you can imagine, whether it's fighting when you're kids, or whether it's, you know, later in life, supporting each other on every level you can imagine, you know, trying to be there for each other as brothers. One of my brothers is a musician, so that influenced my son, so he's a guitar player, my son's a guitar player, so, you know, different things like that. And of course our parents, you know, my dad was an important person, you know, he was an ambassador, represented Israel, and he knew all the big leaders, and, you know, always growing up around that, you know. And my mom turns the world.
Gilad worked as a journalist before he became a diplomat. He served in Nairobi and Los Angeles before leaving Israel's foreign ministry in 2008 and settling in Nairobi permanently.
I've jumped careers, you know, I'm like one of those, I move on, just, you know, when opportunities knock, I listen. So I've been like, I mean, careers, work, I understand the work behind this. But I was a bellboy in a hotel for 5 years, carrying luggage back in the day. But you get to know the hotel and the workings of the hotel, of course, yeah, and the industry. And I worked in a CD store back in the days when CDs was everything, yeah. So in a shopping mall, in the big shopping mall in Jerusalem, I did that for a few years. I worked as a journalist at Channel 2 TV in Israel, just around the turn of the century, 2000 celebrations and on. And then I worked as a diplomat during the foreign ministry, following my dad's footsteps, and brought me to Kenya, you know. It brought me to represent Israel in Kenya, where I really connected opportunities again, you know, to come back. And that's kind of what led to me coming back eventually to work for Amiran, the agriculture company. Music is like such a multi-sided thing, and you'll meet musicians who are very like rounded musicians who know how to read music and write and produce and direct, and for me it was always the singing. I'm a songbird, you know, I like to sing. It was always more about that than anything else. Right from childhood, a music teacher in a school in England when we were in London kind of said, you know, singled me out and said, join the chorus, the boys' choir, which was for Jewish songs, you know. And I still love that music. It's very like musical, very lyrical. Like it's singing psalms in the original language, okay? And that stuck with me to this day. I wish I had my guitar, I'd sit and sing it for you, but I mean, I really love that kind of music. It started me out. And then you have your influences. I mean, I grew up around rock, hardcore rock sometimes. I grew up listening to Beatles, listening to Jimi Hendrix, listening to The Doors. Stuff that here, back in those days, nobody was really into that much, you know? But a lot of influences. And then in high school, I was in a band. So I've like always been around music. So again, as the singer, cover songs. And then much later, after the army, in my 20s, in Jerusalem, I was part of founding a rock band called The White Donkey. Jerusalem rock is very religious, very, very connected to a very spiritual, very political place, you know, Jerusalem. So in your 20s, you have something to say, you say it, you know. And we were very outspoken. And just around the time my son was born, we were just around after I was married, so families started coming into the mix and making a living, you know, because music was never, you know, back in those days, yeah.
He became relevant in Kenya when he featured ex-TPF contestant Wendy Kimani in their hit track Unajua back in May 2015.
I went back to singing a few years after I got back to Kenya, like 2011, 2010, something like that, and it was just live band singing in a club with Calabash Band, who's like well known here, and I just asked to get out. It was really me asking to get up and sing a cover song, and they said yes, and I did. And they said, do you know another? Like, this guy's for real, you know? And it just repeated, and I kept coming back for weeks. Any chance they'd give me to sing just for fun, really just enjoying singing. And at some point I started covering Kiswahili songs, Ali Kiba and Kidum and Juliani, and just doing my own versions of songs that I was vibing with. And then I wrote my own, you know, and then I wrote my own. I wrote Unajua. By that time, Wendy had joined the band, Wendy Kimani. So she was like the obvious choice to collab with, because she's pretty much the only musician I knew, yeah? I wasn't in music. I was working in corporate, having fun as a hobby with music.
I'll know when I see you. Nitaona in your eyes, and I'll know when I hear your voice. Kwa kweli, this is my choice. I'll be there.
In the same year, he released an official video to his single, Semih Me Lele. Like his chart-topping Unajua, Semih Me Lele is a love song that has struck the right chord with Kenyan music fans.
I was in a place of just doing it for fun. And so, you know, if the country went wild, Kenya, forget everywhere else. In Israel, when I released Unajua, and guys heard it, they really liked it. They didn't understand it as much. But those who knew me were like, oh, cool, he's still doing music. Yeah? But as a hobby. Here, people took it really seriously and started doing all these interviews and all that stuff. And then I wrote another because I wanted to see if, you know, it wasn't just like luck. So I wrote Semih Me Lele, which did just as well or better. You know, you might argue it did better, yeah?
Baby.